And with that, I would now like to welcome to the front of the room, Patty Nece. She's on the board of the Obesity Action Coalition, and she really is a very powerful advocate on behalf of people living with obesity. Happy to call her my friend as well. And she'll be talking through some of the communications campaigns and also sharing her thoughts on how some of these messages resonate with her from a patient perspective. So welcome, Patty.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you. I'm glad you got that exercise in. That's very nice. Thank you to the Roundtable for inviting me back. I'm so pleased to be here again. You know, one of the first presentations I ever did talking about my experiences with weight was at a Roundtable meeting, and nobody's been able to shut me up since. So thank you for that. So for those of you who haven't heard me or don't know me, let me just give you a little bit of my background. I've had obesity for as long as I can remember. I don't remember a time I wasn't the big kid in the room. It just never happened to me. Obesity isn't a choice. So along with that, as you might imagine, and as Rebecca indicated, I've lived a lifetime full of stigma and shame and blame directed at me because of my weight. And you know what? No matter how many successes I had in life, I never could get a handle on my weight. I tried time and time again, diet after diet. And each time I failed, I felt, or each time actually a diet failed me, I felt more and more ashamed, more and more guilty. But I now think about it differently. And I'll share some of that as I go forward. So we talked in the first session about the confusion that's out there and the different messages and the multiple messages that are out there. Let's think for a second, if you want to do something about your weight, what kind of messages are out there for you? Well, let's see if I can figure out how to do this. There's a few examples of what somebody with obesity may be facing if they're trying to address their health and their weight. Here are a few more of the current trends. Intermittent fasting is a big one right now. It's an ever-evolving landscape. There's always something new coming out. The coffee example from the first session was wonderful. Think about applying that to your entire diet. And there's confusing information about it from a patient perspective. It's difficult to know where to turn. I call it the noise. And now added to the diet culture is the no diet culture, which has been flourishing because many people have not found success in traditional diets. I don't know the exact statistics, but I didn't find success in traditional diets for a long time until I was able to address what was underlying my eating. I sort of knew what to do, but I wasn't doing it, and the question was why. And that took a while for me to figure out. So we have the dieting messages. Then we have the miracle cures. Oh my God, 25 pounds in only 2 weeks. Let me try that. I love that idea. So you got to sort through the marketing as a patient. And that was one issue I don't think I raised in the first session, but there are huge marketing forces at work here. And corporations and companies trying to make money out of nutrition and fitness. I particularly like that first one. I'd like to look in 4 weeks, start with that initial body, and then be jumping for joy at the end of a month. You think that's realistic? Probably not for most people. But so they're trying to cut through that noise is very difficult for someone with obesity. What do we rarely hear about? Explanations of what's happening in your body, that your body is fighting weight loss. You don't hear those messages that often as a person with obesity. I didn't really hear them until I started working with an obesity medicine specialist. That message needs to get out there. You don't hear about weight as being a long-term issue. You know, all those miracle cures, do it and you're done. just do this diet, lose the weight, your life will be perfect. Doesn't work that way. Weight management is a lifetime pursuit for those of us with obesity. We also don't hear much about how healthcare professionals can help. We probably hear more about bariatric surgery than other things health professionals can do to help people manage their weight. So those messages, I think, to a large extent, get lost in the chatter. But there is one clear message that comes through. People living their lives in larger bodies are less than in society. You know, I can't tell you the number of times people, anonymous people in passing cars, have yelled out things to me like, "You big fat whale." Typical example. And how many people have looked at me as a failure just because I can't control my weight or couldn't control it on my own. We are told that it is all personal responsibility. There rarely are mentions of the environment, the biology, the psychology. But this message is the clear one that comes through. And unfortunately, it's not a positive one. Or is it a helpful one? Here are just a couple examples. I could go on for hours and hours with examples of, this is a more explicit example of weight bias. Eat less fatso, that says it all right there. It's all about the individual and how much they eat. There are no other forces at play. Or the typical, this is a little more subtle. Notice that virtually no one in these pictures, which are torn right from media, have heads. I have a head. It's right here. People don't even realize this. I didn't realize this until I started working in this area and reading some of the work that Rebecca did and the work the Obesity Action Coalition and other organizations have done on this issue. I thought it was appropriate. Who wants to show their face if they're at a higher weight? Who wants to be acknowledged for that? But the bottom line is, it's dehumanizing. It is dehumanizing, and it's another thing we need to pay attention to in any campaigns going forward. Then there are unintended biases demonstrated. Here's an example just from last week. The Trust for America's Health put out a State of Obesity report, which is a great report I'm going to talk about a little later too. But several organizations picked up these graphics to demonstrate it. Notice that the first one with the French fries and the last one with the donut, what does that communicate to you? Never mind the one in the middle with this non-person image, and all it's about is waist size, not health, of course. But doesn't that communicate to you? It does, at least to me. What that communicates to me is that it's all my responsibility for eating fast food, French fries, and donuts. It's all my responsibility for what I've eaten. Again, putting personal responsibility, not looking at the larger picture. I can tell you that I've been fortunate enough working with my specialists to have about 100-pound weight loss and maintain that weight for a number of years now. I haven't had fast food French fries in years. And I haven't had a donut, despite their availability, on a weekly basis in my office for years. And I still carry excess weight. There's more to it. It's more complex than that. So where does that leave patients? Well, this statistic comes from the ACTION study that was first published in 2016, I think, or some of the results were 65% of the patients surveyed believe that obesity is a disease. Here's the disconnect. The reason for not seeking treatment is that managing weight is my own responsibility. How many disease states, how many different physical problems have you had where you thought it was all your responsibility to take care of? And they think they know what is needed to manage their weight. Well, you may know what is needed, but you might not be able to figure out on your own why you need it or what's preventing you from reaching those goals. that certainly was the case in my instance. All the bias and stigma that I had experienced my entire life, I did what's called internalization. I'd taken it inside. I became my own worst bully. And you know, when all you say to yourself are negative things about your weight, it is virtually impossible to change your behaviors around it. So, as discussed in the first session, there are a variety of viewpoints here. I'm looking at this from sort of an organizational level. One of the first movements was the fat acceptance movement, and NAFA is the National Association for the Advancement of Fat Acceptance. And their mission is sort of political. It's to eliminate discrimination, basically, against people of size. Then body positivity sort of came along. Body positivity these days can mean a million different things to a million different people. But I think it first started out as accepting and loving your body just as it is. It's okay if you carry extra weight. You need to care about yourself. Celebrating diversity of body weight, shapes, and sizes. The Obesity Action Coalition, of which I'm vice chair at the moment, takes a certainly opposes discrimination and weight bias. But we generally view obesity as a disease and that obesity matters to health. It may not have an impact immediately on you, but it will likely have an impact on you eventually. Some people can live their lives, their entire life course at a higher weight and not develop any adverse effects. But I think probably this is just a lay opinion, I think most of us probably do. Another movement that sort of grew out of body positivity is the health at every size movement. The Hayes philosophy doesn't equate weight with health or disease. They think that framing, this gets back to the first discussion, framing using the term obesity actually promotes stigma. And they focus on intuitive eating rather than on dieting, in part because diets have, to a large extent, failed for a lot of people. But they also think it's a more natural approach in working with your body and may help you avoid weight cycling, which is, of course, not a good thing for anybody. So you have all this diversity again in these organizations. I have to tell you, from my own point of view, I wish there had been a body positivity movement around when I was young. I wish I could have seen people in a variety of sizes in media. I mean, I grew up in the Twiggy generation. Just to see myself represented. Maybe I would have felt better about myself. Maybe if we had had Nike ads with mannequins closer to my size, I would have bought that exercise gear and gone out and actually exercised. So I think that needs to continue. Diversity needs to continue. I pulled this off of Twitter just the other day. This is someone who is trying to ferret through these different messages. It's so damaging, the doctors say you're fat, YouTubers say you're lazy, typical stereotype of people with obesity, and fat acceptance says you're fat is fine, you're not sick. I joined that movement and ignored an obvious issue for half a decade because I was being taught society was wrong and my body was fine. I put this out there not to say that any movement or any organization is right or wrong. I think there are good things in all of these philosophies that we need to draw on. And this just shows how people can get confused amidst all the noise. The common ground these organizations have, though, is that weight bias, stigma, and discrimination have to end. They're harmful, and they need to stop. I think the different organizations may get there via different channels, but I do have one example of where they joined together. UK Cancer Research or Cancer Research UK, I should say, has been they've been trying to raise awareness about the connection between obesity and various cancers, and these are 3 of their campaigns. Well, they're equating it to smoking in the top 2 I have here. A letter protest came together from a whole bunch of different sources, including Ted Kyle, signed off on it, one of your roundtable members, and others from the UK, America, other parts of the world, who all have different viewpoints, generally. But they came together to point out the stigma that this last campaign, the one with the 3 cigarette ads, showed, and implying that individuals are largely in control of and responsible for their body size, and therefore cancer, going to get blamed for cancer, supports a culture of blame and plays into the prejudices and negative stereotypes that exist. So there is hope. I think this is an area where it shows unintended consequences of the campaign, further stigmatization of people with obesity, but also shows that there's hope for these organizations to find some common ground. I mentioned earlier the Trust for America's Health Report. It was issued last week. It's a great report, but it did highlight, again, the cultural differences in obesity rates. People at lower incomes and people of color are at higher risk, and that Latino and Black adults had the highest rates of obesity. I wanted to point out just one example. This comes out of Duke University that is a culturally diverse study, since they're so lacking. But in there, they launched something called the SHAPE program. Most of the participants were economically disadvantaged Black women. They were all told this wasn't a weight loss program. It wasn't about weight loss. And the point was to try and keep women who are all at class 1 obesity, which is a fairly low range in the BMI scale, at that weight, to stop their weight trajectory, which I think is often an underlooked goal or undervalued goal, the stop weight trajectory. And they gave them tailored behavior change. A lot of this was e-communication. They were supported every month. And the result was, in this community, at 12 months, 62% of the participants had maintained their weight or had lost some weight. And interestingly enough, they also observed, and this was a finding they hadn't anticipated, a lot less depression in the group. And the authors noted that we need to have studies and we need to have programs that are tailored to different communities. I'm going to end with talking about what is currently in the news. So about a week and a half ago, I think now, it's been a long week, Bill Maher let loose on his show, which is Real Time with Bill Maher, I believe, on people with obesity. He went on for 6-8 minutes talking about being fat isn't a birth defect. No one comes out of the womb needing to buy 2 seats on an airplane. Importantly, he said, fat shaming doesn't need to end, it needs to make a comeback. And that some amount of shame is good, right? Where would we ever say that in any other health context? Where would we say that shaming somebody advances the ball, makes them better, helps them? I don't think anywhere. I've left out a lot of the colorful pieces that he mentioned as well, because they're not quite G or even R-rated. So, but as certainly at the Obesity Action Coalition, we were debating about how to respond to this. In the meantime, James Corden had his own response. It was great. He talked about it from a personal standpoint. He has had overweight. He talked about struggling his whole life with his weight, that fat shaming is just bullying, and bullying only makes the problem worse. I don't think stuff like this is going to solve the obesity epidemic. And the fat shaming never went anywhere in the first place. It didn't need to make a comeback because it has never left. I have to tell you what this did on social media. It has been shared millions of times, and it opened the floodgates of people living their lives at higher weights and larger bodies commenting, finally, about their experiences with stigma and bias. Some of it's in the medical community, some of it's in society at large. It is all over. But his personal message, I think, gave people permission to share their own personal experiences. You could spend hours reading the threads on Twitter and Facebook and everywhere else on this particular issue and the responses. And I think noticeably, usually when an issue of fat shaming or an issue about weight comes up on social media, you have the haters, the trolls, the commenters that say, oh, it's just simple, just stop eating, you'll be fine, or whatever. Or they'll say, you know, things like that one graphic I showed, eat less fatso, things like that. I haven't seen that much in relationship to the different social media comments on this particular piece. I don't know if it's the flood of people or who have responded positively to this or not. I'm not sure. But it's a very interesting phenomenon. And, you know, I want to meet James Gordon now. I'd even do carpool karaoke with him if he let me. So just a few final thoughts. And some of this is echoed, and I came up with these before I heard the first panel. Got to find a way to cut through the noise and simplify the message as much as possible. Cultural differences are important. You need to consider those. Communications have to avoid any further stigmatization of people with obesity. We've had enough. There's been enough of it. We get it from everywhere, and it's important that we're cognizant of any potential unintended consequences for that. Organizations may find common ground in anti-stigma issues. Might be a place to work together. And understanding and conveying the real experiences of people with obesity is powerful. The James Corden response demonstrates that. It is more powerful than perhaps anything else. Thank you very much for your time.